Hello and welcome. You're watching To The Point. Natwar Singh's explosive interviews about Sonia and Rajiv Gandhi have dominated the news, riled Sonia Gandhi, shaken the Congress party and excited the opposition. More importantly, Natwar Singh's revelations have raised critical questions about Sonia and Rajiv Gandhi as well as the image we have of them. So tonight in a special episode we discuss what Natwar Singh has said, how we should respond to it and where it leaves the two Gandhis. Over the next 1 hour, I shall be joined by some of India's most thoughtful editors and academics, as well as top party spokesmen, to debate and discuss the Natwar Singh revelations. And now joining me to discuss what Natwar Singh has revealed is the editor-in-chief of the India Today group, Shekhar Gupta, the former editor of The Hindu, Siddharth Varadarajan, India's best-known sociologist, Dipankar Gupta, Congress MP, author and former Minister Shashi Tharoor, and BJP spokesperson Siddharth Nath Singh. Shekhar Gupta, do you accept Natwar Singh's claim that Sonia refused to become Prime Minister because in 2004 Rahul was adamantly opposed to it? He was scared that she would be killed and she therefore was given by him a 24-hour deadline to say no. Do you accept that, or do you think Natwar Singh is making it up?
Look, first of all, if you know Natwar Singh, you don't know him as somebody who makes things up. He has a good memory, he is a good storyteller, he tells it in correct English, which most of us cannot do. At the same time, there is no great surprise, there is no great revelation to the fact that Sonia not taking Prime Ministership was a consciously thought out, deliberate political decision, right? I am too hard-boiled a journalist to have believed for one moment that this was renunciation. I think barring a few Congress people who sat in the front rows and sort of shed crocodile tears, nobody would have believed it was renunciation. So the fact of this being a political deliberate decision was never to be disputed. But having said this, first of all, I have no reason to doubt Natwar Singh. But I would also like to remind you, Karan, that while this was going on, the drama was going on in 2004, one wise old man who was even then maybe 10 years older than Natwar Singh is now had said the same thing, that the children have forced her not to take up the job out of fear for her security, and that was Jyoti Basu. And
Absolutely.
He had made that statement publicly.
Dipankar Gupta, does the fact that Sonia and Priyanka Gandhi called on Natwar Singh on the 7th of May to prevent him making this particular story or revelation public, in your eyes prove that Natwar Singh's story is correct?
Well, you see, I think when Sonia and Priyanka went to his house, they dropped the defenses completely. Now, whatever Natwar Singh says has to be accepted as true, because they have opened themselves up to this attack. At the same time, going along with what Shekhar just mentioned, I don't think many people actually bought the story that she was not taking up the Prime Ministership because of her spirit of sacrifice. In fact, most people thought that she was probably scared of the kind of ruckus the BJP might kick up. But frankly, it didn't occur to me that her son and daughter were against it, or son at least. But if her son was against it, I think it makes eminent sense, and it's not such a sensational point either, except for the fact it takes away a few brownie points from those who wanted to portray Sonia Gandhi as a self-sacrificing ascetic, which she is not, and nobody really believed she was. Everybody knew there was some story behind it, but most of us felt that maybe she was afraid to face the heat in Parliament. So this would be a good way out. And as events, eventually materialized, it turned out to be a very wise decision. She was in the background and she had all the powers. What more do you want?
But the important thing is that you do agree that the fact that she and Priyanka met Natwar Singh on the 7th of May to try and prevent him publishing the story is actually in a way proof that the story is correct and credible. You agree on that, don't you?
It makes Natwar Singh's story very credible because of the fact that these two came to his house, not that they were regular visitors and old friends and things of the sort. It wasn't a normal visit, and therefore when Sonia and Priyanka went to Natwar's house, it's obviously quite clear that they had an agenda. And one tends to believe Natwar's side of the story, but whatever Natwar says now cannot be disputed, and tends to be credible simply because they went there. They had no business going there, no who's advised them, but whoever advised them should be thrown out of the inner circle.
I'll come to you in a moment, Shekhar, but Siddharth Vardarajan, let me put this to you. Does this contradict Sonia Gandhi's own version, which became very popular and very well known, that it was her own inner voice that had spoken to her and prevented her becoming Prime Minister? Or is there some sense in which her claim of an inner voice is consistent with the story that Natwar has now revealed?
Well, I mean, just to reiterate what Shekhar said, if you go back and look at the kind of commentary that most political analysts offered in the days after May 18th, 2004, everybody assessed her act of renunciation. And it was an act of renunciation, but it wasn't an act of conscience. It wasn't an act of responding to the inner voice. And I think all of us called it right at that time. So that's why we are perhaps not overwhelmed, but if anything, underwhelmed by Natwar's revelation. But, in terms of the official narrative that Sonia presented and that the party has clung to, obviously this allows us to see it in a somewhat different light. Although I will say that what Natwar witnessed is perhaps one part of a set of inputs that went into Sonia's decision.
Well, yes and no.
Perhaps other conversations where he wasn't present.
Can I bring you back to my key question? You see, the reason I'm exploring whether this is the same as an inner voice or whether it's different is this. An inner voice is usually a voice of conscience. It's a voice that talks to you about the moral rightness or wrongness of something you're about to do. It usually then guides you in terms of moral precepts. But when your son is scared that you may be killed, there's no moral voice involved. So that's why I ask you, was this a moral voice of conscience that spoke to her from inside her heart and soul? Or was it just her son being scared she'd be killed, which is something to do with fear, it's to do with life, but it's not a moral voice telling you about the rights and wrongs?
My sense is that she was consumed by a number of fears. Obviously, the fear that Rahul expressed is something that she may have shared, but a bigger fear for her would have been, what happens if she proves not up to the task of being Prime Minister? And there was a very likely, chance that she wouldn't. So rather than jeopardize the Gandhi family's hold over the Congress, I think it was a very, politically astute move that she took to give up this post and to then present it as something that was, the product of an inner voice. But as I said, no serious journalist at that time, no serious analyst really believed the official explanation.
I want to come to you very quickly, Shekhar, before I go to Shashi, because I think Shashi should have a big chance to try and counter everyone. But there's a very interesting spin put on it by Siddharth Vardarajan that maybe Sonia Gandhi believed she wasn't up to the job of being Prime Minister. Not that it would be morally right or wrong for her to be PM, but perhaps she didn't actually have what it takes to be PM. Do you think there's a sense of that involved, or would you disagree?
Well, I can maybe look at it slightly differently. Maybe in a sense I agree, but maybe instead of there being a doubt about my own competence for the job, there may have been worries about how differently I will be viewed in the job. For example, just imagine if Sonia was Prime Minister of India when 26/11 happened. Look at the pressure she would be under. If she maintains strategic restraint, she's a foreigner, what do you expect? Any Indian would have gone and bombed the Pakistanis. If she had gone ahead and bombed the Pakistanis and it had led to nuclear war, you had a foreigner. So whatever happened from then on, she would be judged differently and the opposition would constantly be sharpening their knives. So normal setbacks in the life of a government will be laid at her door as this Italian who's come and usurped our government. So I think she's a smart person. She has a very sorted out linear mind of a European. She doesn't have this spaghetti mind of an Indian.
Shashi Tharoor, we have many explanations doing the round in the studio about why possibly Sonia never took the job. In addition to the explanation she gave, hers was that it was an inner voice that had guided her to tell her that she shouldn't take it. Natwar Singh says it was her son who was dead scared mummy would be killed and put his foot down. But you've also got the possible suggestion from Siddharth Vardarajan that she felt she wasn't up to the job, she didn't have the competence, and then there's Shekhar saying that maybe it was a wise and cautious thing because at difficult moments she'd have been called Italian and not Indian enough. Do you think, given these multiple explanations, the time has come for Sonia Gandhi herself to tell the Indian people her side of the story and not say that I leave it for the time when I write a book, because who knows when that book will come out? This is an issue that needs to be cleared up here and now.
Look, Karan, I think we will have to leave it to her to decide when it's appropriate for her to tell the story. But it seems to me that it should be no surprise at all that a number of factors would have gone into her mind in making a decision whether to accept or not the prime ministership the UPA had just offered her. She would have undoubtedly consulted her family and close advisors. That's normal for anyone in that sort of position. And a number of factors would have come into her mind. I slightly object to your use of the word moral. There would be nothing moral or immoral in deciding to be prime minister, but rather there would be practical considerations as to her rightness because of her indeed foreign origins. You remember Sushma Swaraj threatening to shave her head at that point, and the BJP whipping up a hysteria about Sonia Gandhi's foreign origins. There was all that. There was undoubtedly concern about security. She had witnessed or suffered, endured the loss of both her husband and her mother-in-law to assassins. Why should she not take security into account? It would have been foolish and indeed un-prime ministerial not to consider all of these aspects before deciding what to do. When she spoke of an inner voice, she meant that it was her internal conviction that the right thing to do was to turn it down. And very clearly, this is indeed, it seems to me, what happened at the end. So the consensus amongst your group that this revelation is not a big surprise ought to be the consensus we stay with. I think this so-called bombshell headline, I'm afraid, Karan, is a bit of a damp squib.
Can I stop you there? You see, it's not a big surprise that she didn't take the job, and she didn't for a multiple set of reasons. What is perhaps actually under threat and badly questioned is the image of a saint, the image of a woman who sacrificed, the image of a woman who renounced in the good Indian tradition. That was something people thought surprising because she wasn't Indian, she was Italian. We put her on a pedestal. Natwar has suggested that that pedestal is cracked and broken. Maybe he's even dragged her off it. That's why it's created a headline. The saint who was thought to be sacrificing, now it seems was actually acting in self-preservation. Not sacrifice, but preservation.
No, but listen, it still is a sacrifice. Here you have the prestigious job of Prime Minister of India. You have all the trappings that come with that, the status and perks, and of course the rank. And she says, no, I won't take it. Now, if she has a number of reasons for saying she won't take it, it still is a sacrifice, and the Indian nation has respected the sacrifice. I don't see any pedestal being chipped away by revelation that she has a number of factors in mind in making
I'll come to you in a moment. Dipankar Gupta, let me bring you in, and then I'll come to Shekhar. The truth is that Natwar Singh's revelations go considerably beyond just this story about Rahul not wanting his mother and putting his foot down and the mother agreeing. He actually says that Sonia came to meet him on May the 7th, and then comes the interesting bit. She embraced him, a man that she'd ditched and jettisoned 8 years ago. She apologized for how she treated him. She said that he was her closest friend and that she had shared confidences with him that she had never even shared with her children, Rahul and Priyanka. What do you make of that? Does it suggest a certain element of desperation on her part to ensure that this story was not made public? Because otherwise, people don't quite behave like that, particularly with someone you've cut out of your life 8 years ago.
I think it's rather shame-making, frankly, for Natwar.
When you think that
somebody is saying to don't betray the confidence.
That was to Dipankar. Dipankar, I want you to answer that.
No, it's quite true that once she visited him after such a long gap, it was quite clear that she was quite desperate and worried about what he might reveal in his book. That part is quite clear. What we don't quite know is whether the embrace actually happened, where those things were said. But in the light of the fact that she was there, all that Natwar Singh says seems very credible. And that is why I said earlier that she was wrongly advised to visit Natwar Singh when she did. It's true that Natwar Singh was humiliated by her, and with no good reason really, and that is probably why she stayed away from Natwar Singh, maybe pangs of guilt or just political, calculations. But the fact of the matter is, the way she came in just before his book was being released, makes it very clear that she had something to hide. She was worried about some revelations, and whether or not she embraced him, whether or not something else happened, and or Priyanka embraced him or not, or what she said that you're my best friend, all of these things we now accept for what it is, simply because Natwar has the higher credible ground, shall we say.
I want to put this to you, Siddharth Varadarajan. Congress, in the shape and form of Ajay Markan, has said Natwar's comments are politically motivated. They are ridiculous. They are designed to sell his book. But in contrast, Ambika Soni said that when two people quarrel and fall out, it's not right for one to spill the beans, which clearly suggests that there's truth in what Natwar Singh is saying. Do you think Congress has got its response poorly thought out, if not utterly confused?
Well, both Ambika Soni and also what the former Prime Minister Manmohan Singh said suggests that such a conversation did in fact take place, and that it was wrong for Natwar to betray, quote unquote, this confidence. Now, that's obviously a matter for Natwar Singh and his conscience. He has evaluated the public, shall we say, public interest involved in that conversation and taken a decision to make it public. I want to suggest to you another intriguing possibility, which is that if this particular episode is the most quote-unquote damaging that Natwar Singh has in his book, one wonders why it is that Sonia really wanted to make that visit, and are there other things that Natwar was privy to which he then decided not to write about? Because quite frankly, this particular revelation is not as damaging as one is making it out to be. Maybe there are other things that she didn't want him to write about, and perhaps he chose not to write about them.
Unless she had taken to heart the image we'd conferred on her of being a renunciate, of being a saint, of amazing grace. Do you remember that headline in the Hindustan Times all over the front page the day she renounced it? Maybe she'd begun to believe it and value it and felt that Natwar was threatening it, and that's why she wanted to make a desperate effort to stop it. But let me put something to you, Shekhar. Many people turn around and say, this is Natwar Singh's revenge. Or if it's not revenge, this is his bitterness that is coming forth because he was ditched by her for 8 long years. A, do you think it is revenge and bitterness? And B, even if it is, does it matter?
Well, first of all, it could be revenge and bitterness. In which case, I agree with Siddharth. In fact, he took away my lines, if I may say so, because he's smarter and younger than me. Look, when Sonia and Priyanka go to Natwar's home to plead with him and to embrace him after 8 years of estrangement, to say, you are our closest friend, or uncle, you are my most favorite uncle, don't do this. They haven't gone there thinking that they will stop him from making this revelation. So either then he has listened to them and stopped something, or they are worried about something else, because I don't think they have access to the manuscript, so they don't know what's coming out.
Can I interrupt? You're saying something very important. I want to underline it for the audience. You're suggesting that Sonia and Priyanka fear that there's something bigger and greater that Natwar knows, which he was about to reveal.
I'm quite sure he does. Well, whether he was about to reveal or not, they know what Natwar knows.
So there's a guilty mind there.
Well, it can be guilty or it can be a worried mind, because when somebody, in a Darbari culture, in a dynastic Darbari culture, when somebody works so closely with your family, he or she knows too much.
And there's something else you're also confirming. You're confirming by implication that they did embrace him, they did apologize, they did call him his closest friend.
I'm taking Natwar Singh at face value because that has not been denied. But having said that, I have one question for Shashi Tharoor also. Because the whole renunciation business goes out the window when you ask one basic question. In 10 years of UPA, which was the most prestigious position, the Prime Minister or Chairperson of UPA?
Quite right, and clearly the Chairperson of UPA is the answer. But Shashi, I want you to pick up on the more damaging thought that both Siddharth Vardarajan and Shekhar Gupta so clearly elucidated a moment ago. If they were actually going to meet Natwar, if they embraced him, called him their oldest friend and all of that, and it was only something as small and minimal as the Rahul Gandhi story in mind, then it doesn't add up. And Shekhar believes that therefore clearly there is a bigger story Natwar knows, and Sonia was worried it might come out. It hasn't come out. But the fact that she was worried it would come out suggests there is something bigger that they have to hide. That's more damning, even if we don't know what it is.
Because this is no knockout punch on the Gandhis.
You're also
this may be a self-inflicted knockout punch.
Cynics, Karan.
Go ahead, Shashi.
Karan, you're all such cynics. I mean, you're sitting around imagining things you haven't got the slightest idea about, whether they actually exist, whether these things have actually happened. I mean, none of the participants in this meeting have confirmed that it took place. You are inferring
None of them have denied it. That's more important. None of them have denied it. Forgive me. None has denied it. Even Sonia hasn't denied it. Manmohan Singh hasn't denied it. Suman Dubey hasn't denied it. Priyanka Gandhi hasn't denied it. Saying no, the meeting never happened was the easiest thing for them to do. Except for the fact it would have been untrue if they had.
There are, for those of us who've been at the receiving end of media speculation, there is also a legitimate approach that says We will not deny, because our denial itself gives fuel to the story, and therefore it is better to just let them vent with their speculation and ignore them. And many of us have taken that route, myself included. Having said that, coming back to your particular issue, I still think that if it were true that they went there and they reminded an old family friend of his need to respect confidences, and he then failed to do so, it's rather shame-making for him. I mean, Natwar Singh has always been a gentleman. He's prided himself on the standards of conduct he's maintained. It seems to me, somewhat disappointing that he's let himself down to betray confidences while revealing that he was asked not to betray confidence.
All right. All I'll point out for the sake of the audience is that you think it's strange of Natwar Singh not to feel a sense of friendship when he's been a friend for so long, when the Gandhis ditched him and kept him out of their loop for 8 years when he believes he was innocent and wasn't even given a chance to explain himself. So by the way, if there was a wronging in terms of friendship, it's both ways. But let's move on. Let me put to you, Dipankar Gupta, a second revelation, and that is to do with the fact that far from being the shy, retiring, non-political widow who had nothing to do with politics after Rajiv died and until she became Congress president a good 8 years later, it now emerges that in fact she played a critical behind-the-scenes role in choosing the Congress president. Her first thought was Shankar Dayal Sharma, then vice president. When he said no, her second thought was Narasimha Rao. Is that another revelation for you, that this shy, retiring image of a non-political widow was actually untrue? Although she was doing it out of sight, she was actively guiding the party and taking critical decisions.
I think the image of being a shy, retiring person went out of the window when she was leader of the opposition. So to be in that position and then to lead the party to victory in UPA 1 didn't really demonstrate her shyness or her reticence to be in politics. I think by that time everybody had accepted her as a major political figure, and she wasn't shy by any standards at all. What is also necessary to underline is that this is the first time that I know of, I mean, I may be wrong, but I don't track these people very closely, that Sonia Gandhi has actually come out in the open and said, I disagree what's being said, and I'm upset, I'm going to write my own story. When I write my own story, everything will be, made clear. I don't think she's ever done that in the past. And if she had done it in the past, it must have been sotto voce or not in public, or the journalists didn't pick it up. But I think this is the first time she's come out so openly, which is again a wrong thing to do. The two wrongs don't make a right. First wrong is to go to Natwar's house. The second wrong is to deny strenuously what was being said by Natwar.
I just point out for the audience that Natwar Singh himself made that point yesterday, that never before has Sonia reacted to anything anyone has said. This is the first time she's done it, and he made the same point you're making. But let me go back to that question I put to Dipankar, because I think Dipankar may have got a bit confused with dates. I'm talking about, in fact, her decision to make...
early summer of 1991.
Absolutely, days after Rajiv had died.
When she actually had nothing, supposedly had nothing to do with politics. And then you carry on, if you read the book, I think some of the more fascinating parts in the book are Natwar's exchanging with Narasimha Rao. And we thought so far that all of us are political history junkies and we think we've seen it from close. We all thought that Narasimha Rao actually defied Sonia Gandhi, kept her at bay and ran his government for 5 years.
He was desperate for her approval.
He was desperate for her attention and he was being given the cold shoulder. And he's actually begging Natwar Singh for his intervention. And you can then see that Sonia Gandhi was still a larger-than-life figure in the Congress party.
I'm going to pick up on both those points, but first, are you surprised that literally, and this would have been perhaps in the first 10 days after Rajiv's assassination, that she was suggesting Shankar Dayal Sharma as a successor? That was the time when one would have thought she'd be a shattered widow, not wanting to meet politicians, and yet she found time to consult Haksar, to pass on to the party the message that Shankar Dayal Sharma should be the next president. When he said no, she went back to Haksar and found time to appoint Narasimha Rao. So even in those dark days, just literally days after Rajiv's assassination, she was being a politician.
Well, she had spent almost 2 decades in India's #1 political family. And I'll recall one conversation to you. When I interviewed her on TV in 2004 at Anand Bhavan in Allahabad, and I asked her, what made you come to politics? And she said, looking at the wall which had portraits of Jawaharlal Nehru, Motilal Nehru, Indira Gandhi, she said, anytime I walk past these portraits, it seemed to me as if all these great people, great ancestors were complaining to me. They were upbraiding me for not taking on the responsibility. And I think she was always a political, she always had a political mind.
You know, the other interesting thing that you heard over there a moment ago, Siddharth Varadarajan, is the fact that far from there being a Prime Minister in Narasimha Rao who's strong enough to say she doesn't count, she doesn't matter, he was desperate, it seems from Natwar Singh's book, for her approval. There's one point in time in December 1994 when he called Natwar Singh and said, my relationship with Sonia Gandhi is ruining my health. If she wants me to go, I'll go, but I can't carry on in this way. And he sought Natwar's intercession. This clandestine meeting at night in Muhammad Yunus's house was arranged, and it didn't work. Are you surprised that a man who was independent, who was so powerful, one thought, as Narasimha Rao, actually was cringing for the approval of a lady who was an Italian and who supposedly had no knowledge and understanding of Indian politics and didn't want to be part of it? Did that surprise you?
I think these are definitely the more surprising and more interesting parts of his memoir, Karan, because until now, those of us who have looked at the Congress have treated the Narasimha Rao period as an interregnum, right? As what in government would be called break-in service for the Nehru-Gandhi dynasty, when you had a non-family person firmly in saddle as Prime Minister. Now, in Natwar's telling, Narasimha Rao, far from living up to that position and spreading his wings, was insecure. And I suppose, given the Darbari culture of the Congress, this shouldn't surprise us. But I think this is a new aspect which takes away some of the sheen that Narasimha Rao had acquired as a non-Nehru Gandhi Congress leader of independent stature.
What about something else, Shashi Tharoor? Natwar Singh says that in fact he has no doubt, and he's absolutely clear about this, that Sonia Gandhi had access to secret government files. These were carried to her by Pulak Chatterjee, and he adds, several other ministers in government know it. Now, I know that Dr. Manmohan Singh has denied it, but everyone says there's no way Dr. Manmohan Singh would have ever confirmed it. Other than deny it, what else can he do? And his denial, therefore, for many people doesn't carry much conviction. And this is therefore the second time after Sanjay Baru that we're hearing that a lady who hadn't taken the oath of secrecy had access to government files, and this was therefore a clear breach of constitutional and governmental propriety. How do you, as a congressman and as a former minister, respond to that?
We deny it completely, Karan. I mean, I'm certainly very concerned about the implication that this sort of thing happened, because both the principals involved, that is the Prime Minister and Mrs. Gandhi, have denied that this story has any foundation whatsoever. And the Congress party has already made it clear at the time of Sanjay Baru's book that, that this didn't happen. It's natural for the leader of the ruling coalition to be briefed on governmental initiatives, and certainly contacts would have taken place, but no files were ever taken outside the government offices into the residence of the
Can I
UPA
just ask you
chairperson.
one thing? You're very strongly denying it. How do you know this is the case? How do you know no files were taken? I presume you weren't there watching and seeing. You're clearly relying on someone's assurance. I mean, how do you know this is the case?
But how does Natwar Singh claim it? He wasn't there carrying these files himself either. This is all hearsay. He claims some other person carried the files to a third person and he wasn't present. So I am saying, on the basis of guidance from my own former Prime Minister, that it never happened.
And do you think your own former Prime Minister could have said anything other than it never happened? Could he have ever turned around and said, yes, Natwar is right, files were sent?
Look, his own staff who report to him would scarcely have been carrying files way behind his back. I can well imagine a scenario in which the Prime Minister may consider it necessary
had dual
to have
loyalties,
the view of
didn't
the
he?
UPA chairperson.
Pulak Chatterjee had dual loyalties,
He
didn't
had no dual loyalties.
The only loyalty was Sonia Gandhi.
Loyalty to the government.
Did you hear that?
That's
Pulak Chatterjee
the
didn't have
reason he
dual
was appointed
loyalties.
there. In fact, if you go to the...
Loyalties to the government of India, of which he's a sworn servant.
But is the sworn head of the government of India Manmohan Singh, or was it Sonia Gandhi? You see, we come back to that
and was the
issue.
Prime Minister given his own choice of his principal secretary? He wasn't.
A quick answer to that before I go to the Pankaj Gupta. Go ahead, Shashi.
No, as far as I'm concerned, when the Prime Minister appoints somebody, whether it's a Sanjay Baru or a Natwar Singh or a Pulak Chatterjee, they report to him.
Okay.
And therefore he has absolutely every knowledge of what they've done and not done.
Absolutely, and there you spoke like a loyal congressman, which is what one expects of you. Dipankar Gupta, Natwar Singh's comment on Sonia Gandhi's hold on the Congress party was that it is completely total, that it was more firm and durable than that of Jawaharlal Nehru and Indira Gandhi, that she was authoritarian and Machiavellian. Do you tend to believe that?
Well, I don't believe that, because I think Mrs. Indira Gandhi was probably more Machiavellian and firm than Sonia Gandhi was. I think Mrs. Indira Gandhi did more damage to the country's political structure than Sonia Gandhi did. So to say that Sonia Gandhi was the ultimate in Machiavellian tactics in the Gandhi family is, I think, quite incorrect. At the same time, I also think that you're probably missing the point of the book, or should have been the point of the book, or at least these interviews, and that is this: that we should look into why was Natwar Singh humiliated in this fashion? What is this food for oil program all about? What was the report that Virendra Dayal sent out? What did Justice Pathak say what he said? Who is this Bhim Singh in the Congress party, and what happened in 97 or thereabouts? These are some of the issues I think which are very, very troublesome and testy, and we should probably pay a little more attention to them. Maybe this is where the rub lies.
Can I interrupt you and say that we paid a lot of attention to them in the interview I did with Natwar Singh on the Sonia section, where Volker was a rather large part of it, and we asked Natwar Singh in particular why Justice Pathak had said to him he was under extreme pressure to find Natwar guilty, and secondly, what were these documents that were never given to Justice Pathak? And the belief is that those documents would have corroborated a letter that was sent in January 2004 by the Indian ambassador in Baghdad to the Foreign Secretary, suggesting that the Congress party and Bhim Singh both had got million barrels worth of oil.
So here we are with an episode. Karan,
But can I stop you there? That is not an issue that my guests today are experts on, which is why I'm not raising it with you. You'd be surmising and guessing just as much as anyone else, and that might be interesting, but it wouldn't be elucidating and informative, which is why I'm not raising it here. But it is a subject for another occasion with people who know the answers.